Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Iowa Prison Perspectives. I'm Sue Hutchins, and this is a collaboration between Iowa Cure, the Iowa Justice Action Network, and Living Beyond the Bars to bring attention to the prison system in Iowa and the issues that we have, concerns that we have. A lot of people really don't understand, as you know. If this is your first time with us, welcome. And as a lot of you have been here before, know that there are a lot of things that go on in prison that the public is very unaware of. And my goal, our goal in this, is to help the public become aware and possibly gain some public interest in making some changes that are necessary. If you want to reach me, I can be reached at our Gmail, which is Iowa Prison Perspectives, and that's IA Prison Perspectives at gmail.com. This morning, we're very, very fortunate to have Alexandra Bailey with us. She is with the Sentencing Project, and one of the things that I'm part of is the committee, state committee, to work on ending life without the possibility of parole. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex and let her tell you a lot of what the Sentencing Project does and a lot about the situation of life without the possibility of parole in this country as well as in Iowa. So thank you so much for joining us, Alex, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Sue, for inviting me. It's been an honor working with Iowa Cure and the Iowa Justice Network over the last several years since I joined the Sentencing Project. The Sentencing Project for the last 30 plus years has been at the vanguard of research and advocacy around our nation's carceral issues. I was hired because we don't just want to study the problem. We want to do something about the problem. So I always say I'm not the smart one at TSP, I'm just the muscle. So my job is to make the rubber meet the road, to create legislation at the state level that addresses the myriad of concerns that we have around mass incarceration. But the key thing is to lessen the number of people who are incarcerated. And so I do this through a couple of different mechanisms. I do this by repealing various types of statutes, for example, life without the possibility of parole, instituting second chance, second look mechanisms whereby people can be resentenced and released, and laws that would require judges to release people who were convicted under various types of circumstances, for example, felony murder, or under a domestic violence situation. And so my goal really is just to bring the ceiling down. When I was first hired, our then executive director, Amy Fettig, said that I count my victories by every person that steps out of prison. But prison is a big problem in America. A lot of people think that our justice system is just, and I understand why folks would want to think that, but it is not. America incarcerates more people than anywhere else in the world, more than Russia and China. We have long sentences that have long been deemed inhumane, inappropriate, and antithetical to public safety, and are no longer used in the vast majority of the Western world. And we have a massive racial disparity problem with Black people making up the vast majority of our prison population. And this also has an incredible impact based on gender, LGBTQ plus status. And this also has incredible blowback for children who have to deal with parents who are incarcerated for long periods of time. And so my job basically is just to see what I can do about that. But Sue, now to your question about life without the possibility of parole. One of my favorite things to say is that the most Googled question about life without the possibility of parole is how long is life without the possibility of parole? And the answer is, and has been different throughout history. So it used to be that in many states, life didn't mean life. It meant you would serve 15 years, 2 decades, and then you would be reconsidered because the state felt that it was a waste of money to continue to incarcerate people who had been rehabilitated, and understood that long periods of punishment actually don't accomplish what it is that they're hoping to accomplish, which is responsibility, rehabilitation, and people no longer offending. Then we get to the past 50 years, where we really see the growth in mass incarceration. And this came out of deliberate choices with policy. You might have heard life means life, tough on crime, 3 strikes and you're out. All of these policy positions, which are really easy to say and were easy for the public to repeat, had massive consequences for all sorts of communities, but in particular Black and Brown communities. It had a devastating effect on women and our society in general. And so life without the possibility of parole has been researched thoroughly, and it has been shown to be ineffective, both as a method of punishment, but also most importantly as a deterrent. So the thought about long sentences has always been that if you give people long sentences, it will deter other people from committing crimes. This has been proven to be categorically false. Guarantee of punishment rather than length of punishment is actually the deterrence. But what we actually see is a very low resolution rate in police, in various police stations across the country. And so the issue that we're having is not prison, it's what we're doing up front. And what we're doing on the back end is highly ineffectual, to say nothing of being highly expensive. So most states, if you take a look at their budgets, prison ranks usually right up there on the largest thing that folks spend on. And yet you'll read in the paper regularly that people starve to death, they have inadequate food, they have bad environments, there's no air conditioning, there's solitary confinement, you name it. And most nations have decided that this is not how you can incarcerate a human being. That putting a person who is traumatized, who's experienced violence, who's committed violence into an extremely violent environment is not the way to solve your problem. And that seems fairly obvious. But the United States has not caught up with that general trend. And so we continue to incarcerate people for life without the possibility of parole, where life means life. And that sounded really great in the 1980s. That sounded like a really swell idea to tackle crime. But now it's time to pay the piper, quite literally. We have an unbelievably large graying population, seniors, people who are sick and elderly and immobile, living in prison. There was a great article that came out in NPR, I want to say maybe about a month ago, that said that America's prisons are not prepared to be old folks' facilities, basically. But that's basically what prison is turning into. You have, in some states, up to 50% of the population being 55 or older, and prison ages you at an incredible rate due to lack of exercise, environment, exposure to chemicals, poor diet, so on and so forth. So 55, I always joke, is really probably 65 or 75 in prison years. And 75, you're Yoda. And that's to say nothing of whether or not you have some serious physical illness to sort of go along with what happens to all of us when we age, but let alone when we age in such an environment. And so now what was already a costly experiment of mass incarceration is about to double, triple, quadruple, or plus across the country. And quite frankly, there are better ways we could be spending that money. But we created these sentences that we have no way out of. And that's normally where I put second look legislation, compassionate release, geriatric release, fair and timely release. mechanisms into place, elder release, because what we want is to allow people who are no longer a threat to society and very costly to the state, because the state has to pay for its prisoners. It is not federal dollars for state prisons. The state is responsible for that money. So these people could go off and be on Medicare, Medicaid, all of the other social safety nets that the United States has created. Instead, they're coming out of your tax dollars with no threat to public safety. And so at the Sentencing Project, we have many papers on this, but the conclusion that we've come to is that's pretty dumb as a public policy position, not to mention ineffective. And so I am attempting to switch it up and give us laws that reflect reality, not just fiscally, but morally, and what we know from the data in terms of how we should be handling our carceral issues. Was that long-winded enough for you, Sue?
That was very, very good, and very informative, and I really appreciate that. One of the things that I would add to that about Iowa is that it costs anywhere between, depending on the prison and your classification, it's either $34,000 up to $57,000 to house a person in Iowa prisons.
Before
And
medical
that
costs.
before medical costs.
Yeah.
And that also does not include the cost to families that need to send money, because people make anywhere between 19 cents and $1.10 or something like that is the top pay in Iowa prison, somewhere around that.
Yeah.
So it's not only a cost to the taxpayer, it's a cost to families, which is all a cost to society. So I would just add that interesting statistic. Medicare and Medicaid budget is nowhere near what the prison budget is in Iowa. I mean, it just doesn't match.
And that's true of many places.
Many places, many places. Also, the mental health issue in prison. If you could speak just to a minute about the mental health issue in prison when we're talking about, especially, well, not especially, but particularly with lifers and people that are up in age.
You know what? I think the best way to talk about this, and this is one of those areas that really makes me angry.
Mm-hmm.
There was a gentleman in Virginia. His name was Taekwon Lee. At the time, I was in this massive argument with the Virginia Department of Corrections about their solitary confinement use for people who had mental illness. They said it was restorative housing. I can assure you it's not. However, Taekwon Lee had schizophrenia. Before he went into prison, he had well-documented schizophrenia amongst a whole host of other mental illness. When he was sent to prison in Virginia, he was sent to a maximum security facility that's called Red Onion, which is in Pound, Virginia. And he was placed into solitary confinement because he was doing what people with untreated schizophrenia do, which is act out in a myriad of ways, talking to oneself, so on and so forth. I think most of us have unfortunately seen what untreated schizophrenia looks like. But if you compound that with a noisy, frightening environment, you are going to sort of reap the obvious consequences of that. And so he was placed into solitary confinement, which, you know, you can Google what it looks like in Virginia. It's a dire picture, even with the updates that the Virginia Department of Corrections has made. And so for months on end, his mother couldn't find him. She didn't know what was going on. And she knew that her son was mentally unwell, and she was terrified. When her and her attorney got to him, he had been in solitary confinement for so long that he was a little over 90 pounds. He was a grown man. And he could no longer speak. He was nonverbal. All he would do is bark and growl, like an animal. I feel like that paints the picture of the solutions to mental illness in most prison facilities across the country. Prisons are not the environment, period, for people who are mentally ill. But we know that people who are mentally ill are often over-policed. Our society often has very little solutions for them in terms of care. I remember talking to Tom Dart, who was the sheriff of Cook County in Illinois, and he said, you know, I don't run a jail, I run the largest mental health facility in Cook County. If you're homeless and you suffer from mental illness, which is how many people become homeless, they don't have anywhere for you to go. They really don't have anywhere to treat you long term, which is what is required for this level of mental illness. And to make sure that you don't freeze on the street in a Chicago winter, they take you to jail. I think that that is pitiful in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, in a country that claims to care for American citizens as much as it says it does. And I think it is why the movement around mental illness is growing and so strong. It's a disability. We compound it usually with post-traumatic stress disorder from what people just go through on the day-to-day in prison. And so every time I think of mental illness, I just think of Taekwon Lee. He just always springs to mind, but it just never, I hear story day after day like that. And it's disgusting. It's disturbing. It's wrong.
Yes, I totally agree. We have a case like that in Iowa, a family that is part of the support group for Living Beyond the Bars. Their son has schizophrenia and he was imprisoned in Florida. And almost the exact same thing happened to him. The family was savvy enough and had enough funds to be able to get him transferred here to Iowa, where they now have contact with him. And because they have contact with him and because they can afford it, he is getting better care. I mean, it's not the best care in the world, but he's functional at this point. And he's no longer nonverbal, and he's eating and he's getting medication, so it's better
Pleased to
for
hear
him.
that.
But that happens all over the country, and it happens here in Iowa too. This family just happened to be savvy enough
Knew what was
and
up. Yeah.
professional enough and know enough people and get an attorney and be able to afford an attorney to get their son transferred here, and not only savvy enough but determined enough. I mean, it took them years. It took them like 9 years to get him here, but his life was saved. It takes a lot for people to be able to get any kind of the care that their families need. And unfortunately, there are so many people who don't have money
Oh no.
or don't have families. There are people doing
And
time
then
here in Iowa that don't
they
have
leave
any.
their
I
loved
talked to
one
a guy that can
hours
talk.
away, and he
Right.
can't even go see them to check in on a
That's
wellness on their wellness.
right. That's right. That's
Oh,
right.
it's
So
horrible.
you have to be a family that is willing to really build a relationship with the person who's incarcerated and with the team that has him incarcerated. And that takes time and effort and energy and consistency. And sometimes it takes being really hard nosed. I mean, being very determined and going after it
And having
because
5 to 6 figures to pay one hell of an attorney.
exactly. So I just wanted to add that there are situations like that here in Iowa also.
Well, also
And there are many situations that we don't even know about, and we never will know about.
I mean,
Never will.
and so many people commit suicide or
Right,
die due
right,
to circumstances, and
right,
we don't know who those people are,
right.
but their lives mattered. And
Yes.
I think the thing about incarceration that really frustrates me, and for your audience, Sue knows me well, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm somebody who's also very passionate about survivors, specifically of domestic violence and about survivors and victims' rights, because I'm a two-time survivor of violent crime. And it's just so incredibly interesting now being in the role that I'm in and talking to people who are incarcerated and learning about their victimization, because that's so frequently what it is. You know, children who are sex trafficked, sexually assaulted, in dangerous and horrible environments that would break anyone, let alone children or young people, having so little belonging in their lives that they turn to the wrong people for a sense of belonging. Living in environments where financial security of any type usually comes with some form of illegality. And, you know, the choice really being do this or your family doesn't eat. Witnessing all of that, I think it's also very important for us to talk about shifting the narrative about survivorship and victimization. Because, you know, there's that old saying that hurt people hurt people.
Right.
I think trauma creates all sorts of antisocial behaviors within a human being, and every human being responds differently based on the health that they receive, what they have access to in their environment. So it's not terribly surprising that very frequently people with poor environments respond poorly. And then we also know, due to brain science and something that many states are now picking up on in terms of getting rid of life without parole for people who are emerging adults, because your frontal lobe isn't even developed until you're between 25 and 27, depending on which scientist you ask. We have to start to look at this differently, because if this was the solution, America would be the safest place on earth. We don't even come close. So I think that's part of the reason that I'm so passionate, is that what happened to my perpetrator in one instance doesn't actually feel like responsibility or accountability or safety to me as one of his victims, you know, on behalf of the state. It feels like they took a damaged person who did damage, who could have been stopped from doing damage if we had a different structure to our society. And rather than addressing that, so what happened to me doesn't happen to other young women, what they did was put him in a cage, and it didn't solve the problem.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. Totally. Okay. I paused it on accident for a minute, so
No
now we're
worries.
back. um, what I wanted to say about that is that there are about the mental health issue is that there is a sheriff in Black Hawk County here in Iowa who has written a book, and it's just been published. His first name is Tony, and I can't think of his last name right now, but I can put it on it'll be on the Iowa Justice Action Network website. He wrote a book about how jail is now the mental health institution in the state of Iowa. So, along with what you were saying, I mean, there are people around the country who are beginning to recognize that, but still, the legislators and the governors, at least the governor of our state, is determined to keep people in prison and determined to keep putting people in prison. Unfortunately, that seems to be getting, I want to say worse. I don't know if that's a fair word or not, but worse. So
Getting better, that's all.
it's not getting better. Yeah, let's
Not
leave it
getting
at that. It's
better,
not
so let's
getting
leave it
better.
at
Yeah,
that.
it's not getting better. Never mind the worst part. It's not getting better. It's not getting better. Our prisons are still overcrowded. Every prison in Iowa is overcrowded except for the women's prison. Every prison is overcrowded. Every
Yeah,
prison.
but don't worry, the rate of incarcerated women has jumped by 700% since 1980. So Iowa might fill that prison yet.
Well, yeah, I believe that. I mean, it certainly increased, but it's the only prison that is not
You
overcrowded.
know, I
So,
mean, obviously, I mean, incarceration is an issue for everyone. But one of the things that I really want people to understand is that incarceration has a very different impact based on gender.
mhm.
Um, like I said, women's incarceration has jumped by 700% since 1980. And a lot of what we see is the type of trauma that people really understand. Domestic violence, leaving abusers and then being in poverty and then being subject to three-strike laws for committing what we would call poverty crimes, petty theft. But a lot of states have it that, if you steal something, if you steal more than $500 or $1,000 worth of goods, that you're officially in the felony area. Whereas I think a lot of us would look at those cases of what people stole, and like be like, I wish she would have called me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I would have taken her to Sam's Club or Costco and taken care of that. Why would we send them to prison? Well, we have three strikes laws. Now judge doesn't have any discretion. So
Right.
much food, diapers, whatever have been stolen. Um, and then there's also the coercive control aspect of abuse, where you're in a coercive and abusive environment that leads you into this type of behavior, often against your will. I mean, we saw that recently in the sex trafficking case where, she killed the person who was trafficking her for sex. And not only did they want to give her prison time for that, but she had to pay the family restitution.
Right.
Um, that is, I mean,
Insane. It's insane.
you said it.
You don't have to. You're a public figure. I'm not. So,
I mean,
well,
I should keep my personal opinion out of it, but I do think that most people in America, upon hearing that story, um, were displeased.
very, 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 very displeased. So let me end by saying thank you very much again. And because of people like you, and because of organizations like the Sentencing Project, and because of opportunities like this to be able to put this out to the public, I stay hopeful that change is on the horizon. I know that it's really slow, and I know that it takes a lot of work and determination. I do believe that it is possible. I don't let myself get overly discouraged. There are days when I'm very discouraged and feel like I'm beating my head against a wall. And then I wake up the next morning and find a different place on that wall to start hitting. So I just can't walk away from this because it is such a tragedy. And the people that are incarcerated that I have come to know over the years because of the work that I've done are well worth the ones that I know are well worth a second chance. I also want to say that I don't think either one of us believe that we should just open the gates and let everybody out of prison.
Most certainly not.
There are people who belong away from society because they are a danger to society. And as Brian Stevens says, we need to incarcerate people that we are afraid of, not people that we're mad at. And we need to look at everybody having an opportunity to appear before a parole board, everybody to appear before a parole board and
Or
have
a
their
judge if your state doesn't
rehabilitation,
have
or a
parole.
judge, or a judge, or a judge, which is even better
A
in
lot
my
of
mind,
places got rid of parole.
and should. Um, Parole board, well, parole boards work for the governor, so there you have it. Um, Going back to a judge is, in my mind, also a better idea. However, appear before somebody who can review their rehabilitation experience since they've been incarcerated and not be judged basically on the nature of their crime.
Well, I
So
mean, even if we still have a lot of judgment about the nature of their crime.
still have it, but not base everything on it.
Agreed, but also one of the things that one of my friends who's been incarcerated and is serving life without the possibility of parole said to me, he goes, once you come to your senses in prison, once you take responsibility, he goes, you're always serving that sentence. It doesn't matter where they put me.
Right.
He goes, but it just makes a lot more sense for me to pay my restitution to society in a productive way rather than
Exactly.
in a way that's just costly. And that always stuck with me. That he's like, there's never going to be a day where I don't wake up sick about what I did.
Right. Agreed. Very good point. Very good point. Very good point. So, to end this conversation, let me just go back to kind of how I started. Um, this is a collaboration between Iowa Cure, Living Beyond the Bars, and the Iowa Justice Action Network. We all work in different areas of trying to make a difference in the lives of the incarcerated as well as the families. My heart is with the families, as those of you who know me know, and the person who's incarcerated is a member of a family also. Um, if you want to reach me or us, the Gmail address is Iowa Prison Perspectives, and that's IA Prison Perspectives at gmail.com. And I would be glad to get back to you if you have someone that you feel like ought to be interviewed for this series, or if you yourself have comments, if you agree, if you don't agree, whatever. We want to hear from you because we really want this to be a public forum to inform people and to get people somehow knowledgeable about what goes on in the prison system. So once again, Alex, thank you so very much, and I will see you soon.
It's my pleasure. And if you want to look at all the stats, if you're a data nerd, visit us at thesentencingproject.org. We have state-specific, federal-specific, and national data for you. So thank you so much for having me, Sue. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.